Welcome to this online lesson. Prevention better than cure? The pace of medical change from 1900 to the present. Consider the two posters at the top. Both are effectively produced as adverts, one by a cigarette company in the 1950s, the other by the government in more recent times. They give quite the opposite messages and use quite the opposite type of techniques with the pictures. One is reassuring, but a lie. The other one is shocking, but with a truthful message. So our aims in this lesson are as follows. Identify progression in medicine over the course of the 20th century and into the 21st. Explain how medicine has progressed over the 20th century. And also evaluate why medicine has progressed over the 20th century. Pause the video if you're going to note this down as a heading. If not, we'll carry on. Let's consider the major causes of death in the 20th century. Happy stuff, I know. Changes in the major causes of death from 1911 to 2011. Heart disease. In 1911, heart disease made up 14.4% of all deaths. By 1951, that had shot up to 45.1% of all deaths. By 2011, that had dropped to 28%. Cancer. In 1911, it was just 6%. By 1951, it's 16.2%, and it seems to have rapidly accelerated up to 29% in 2011. Does this mean that we're getting worse at treating cancer? Infectious diseases. In 1911, they made up 25.9% of all deaths. That's over a quarter. By 1951, made up 4.3%. And then by 2011, it made up only 0.7%. So let's consider these tasks. Why do you think infectious diseases, such as tuberculosis and diphtheria, have dropped since 1900? They've dropped very substantially. However, why might diseases such as cancer and heart disease have risen over the past 100 years? Admittedly, heart disease has dipped somewhat. Thirdly, does the increase in heart disease and cancer suggest that medicine has got worse or better since 1900? Explain your view. Pause the video here and then press play when you're ready to continue. So why have infectious diseases dropped? Well, part of it is down to the fact that we live in a more sanitized world these days. But more to the point, it's all about vaccinations. Many infectious diseases now have effective vaccines that can prevent it, or at the very least prevent serious versions of the disease developing. However, cancer and heart disease have gone up. Why might this be? Well, consider one thing. The number of people dying from infectious diseases has dramatically dropped, but people do still die, so they've got to die from something else. This means that people are living longer, and they're tending to die from diseases that affect more elderly people, such as cancer and heart disease. So, whereas in the past more people died much younger, often from infectious diseases, now they're living longer lives, which is good news. So does the increase in heart disease and cancer suggest that medicine has got worse or better since 1900? It might at first appear that things have got worse because the percentages are going up. Surely that means that things are worse. But it isn't. This actually is evidence that we're now doing things much better than we were before. Cancer and heart disease are still diseases that we're trying to beat, but they tend to be taking people's lives now because other things that used to be so deadly, such as infectious diseases and, let's face it, wars, are less likely to kill people now. Preventing infectious diseases. When Edward Jenner invented his smallpox vaccination, many people refused to believe him and mocked him for his work. However, by the 20th century, the majority of public opinion was in support of vaccinations, especially for children, as a way of preventing and controlling infectious diseases. Here are some of the main vaccinations that have been introduced over the last 100 years or so. 1896, typhoid. Tuberculosis in 1906, sometimes this is referred to as TB. 1913, diphtheria. 1927, tetanus. 1952, whooping cough. 1954, polio. 1964, measles. 1988, MMR. This is the measles, mumps and rubella vaccination. It's quite a famous one, this one. That's because there was a controversy after one doctor published a report that suggested that the MMR vaccination caused autism in babies. Absolutely untrue. Basically, this is completely false. It's been proved to be completely false, and it's Very, very sad in a way that it's taken off in the way that it has. It's worried a lot of people unnecessarily. Anyway, moving on. 2008, HPV. That's the human papillomavirus. And 2015, meningitis B. And lastly, perhaps most famously recently, 2020, COVID-19. So what about these vaccines? If you've never heard of some of these diseases, then, well, count yourself lucky. It means that you've not had to confront them, and you've certainly probably not had them. You may have had COVID, but hopefully you're fine now. COVID's a bit of an odd one out here. The rest of them pretty well work for life, but COVID-19 being such a mutating disease means that we might have to have regular top-ups of COVID-19 vaccine to keep us safe. We shall see. Sometimes we study history to understand what's happening in the future too. So some follow-up tasks. Study the dates for the developments of vaccines and infectious diseases. Copy down the table. Identify which previous medical developments helped these vaccines to be developed. Explain what factors helped these vaccines to be developed and how. And if vaccinations are being developed as recently as 2015 and 2020, do you think it is possible to create a vaccination for all diseases? Explain your answer. If you're unable to answer any of these questions easily, chances are you haven't done enough preparation through the rest of the course yet. So maybe have a look at some of the other lessons that I've produced on how diseases have been treated between the 19th century and the 20th century. If you are ready, press pause and complete those tasks now. How did you get on? Well, previous medical developments have helped here. Don't forget Pasteur's germ theory. He developed some vaccines himself, including the one for chicken cholera and for rabies. And there's Robert Koch's work as well in Germany. Remember, he was able to identify which particular diseases were caused by which particular pathogens, which also helps. What factors help these vaccines develop and how? Well, consider the role of governments in this. Many vaccination programs are rolled out by governments, and they pay for an awful lot of the research, development and production costs. There are other things as well, but I'm going to keep things brief. So is it possible to create a vaccination for all diseases? Well, quite simply, I don't know. It would be a nice idea. But if the last 18 months before I've recorded this have taught us anything, when we put our minds to it, science can create some pretty remarkable things pretty quickly. Preventing illnesses caused by lifestyle. Remember, the DNA breakthrough opened the door to preventing and diagnosing genetic illnesses that people are born with. But what about illnesses caused by how people live their lives? Many of the illnesses caused by lifestyle factors are from choice, such as smoking, drinking alcohol, not exercising, or eating unhealthily. While people have the freedom to make their own choices, the government has launched many different prevention campaigns to try and prevent illnesses created by lifestyle choices, and some recent ones can be seen down the bottom here. The first one is warning pregnant mothers against smoking while they are pregnant with their babies, because of the negative effects that smoking can have on unborn children. The next one looks at just a group of small differences that you can change about your lifestyle, just in a little way, to make a big difference to your health. This was a campaign known as Change for Life. Another of the anti-smoking adverts here. They often go for shock tactics. And one from the Scottish government. Every time you have a drink, it adds up to more than you think. You can see that the advertisers here have cleverly made the wine glass look like an hourglass, ticking away your life. Drinking, it's time to turn it around. So what public health and lifestyle campaigns are you aware of? If you're aware of none, consider the posters at the bottom of this screen. If you are aware of these campaigns, does that suggest that they are effective in changing people's choices or behaviour? No real wrong answer here, but just reflect on it. Perhaps one of these campaigns has actually had an impact on you or someone that you know. And lastly, what do you think is the more effective way of changing people's behaviour? Shock tactics or gentle persuasion? Again, no wrong answer. Let's just hear what you think. Pause the video while you complete those tasks. So hopefully you've identified some public health and lifestyle campaigns that you're aware of, and if not, you've got the ones on the bottom of the screen. So are they effective in changing people's choices or behaviour? Well, think about smoking. If you watch an old movie, virtually everybody smokes in it, but actually a real minority of people do today. So people have become more aware of the dangers of smoking and the costs associated with it, and they've changed their behaviour accordingly. Whether that's down to government campaigns like the one which we see here, or more gradual lifestyle choices and changes in society, well, that's up for historians like us to decide, but you might have your own opinion. So what's more effective, shock tactics or gentle persuasion? It might well be that there's a little bit of both in this, but certainly shock tactics are often used by governments in order to try and jolt people into a sudden change of behaviour. To help us understand this better, we're going to consider a case study, that of lung cancer, a disease that sadly has become more prevalent rather than less prevalent. We're going to consider the modern lung cancer treatments that are used today. 150 years ago, lung cancer was extremely rare. This is likely related to the number of people who smoked at that time, but also to the fact that people simply didn't live long enough to develop this sort of disease. Today, however, over 40,000 people are diagnosed with it each year in the UK. Nearly 90% of all cases are the result of smoking or passive smoking. This is where someone unwittingly breathes in smoking fumes from someone who may be smoking nearby. Lung cancer is extremely difficult to diagnose in its early stages, meaning it is very difficult to prevent from developing or spreading through the body. Sadly, only 10% of those with lung cancer live for more than 5 years. This is compared to survival rates from other cancers, where 50% live for at least 10 years. So one of the treatments that's used in modern times against lung cancer is immunotherapy. This boosts the immune system to stop the cancer from growing. In other words, the antibodies that your body already has attacks the cancerous cells. There's also radiotherapy. This kills cancer cells using radiation beams. Techniques have improved to target cancers more precisely. Pioneering work on this was done in the early 20th century by people like Marie Curie, who today has a cancer charity named after her. And there's surgery. This has been used since the 1930s, but is often too dangerous due to other smoking-related health problems. New techniques have far less impact on the body and a quicker recovery time. And also chemotherapy. Yes, it looks like chemotherapy, and that gives you a good clue as to what this involves, but more often it's referred to as chemotherapy. This is used if radiotherapy is not successful. It involves using powerful chemical medicines to attack cancer cells. However, it does have very serious and often very unpleasant and uncomfortable side effects. Some tasks then. Firstly, you want to get down these different techniques and some details about lung cancer as part of your revision notes. Once you've done that though, explain how lung cancer treatments have developed in the 20th century. That's a practice exam question, a 12 marker. You might want to spend up to 18 minutes on this. I'm not going to be able to give feedback in this lesson though, as I'm going to cover the other content instead. But if you wish to have a bit of practice on it, now is a good opportunity to do that. Pause the video while you complete those tasks. Factors for change. This shows some change between the 1800s and the 1900s and after. Firstly, about the ideas of the causes of disease and illness. In the 1800s, or at least at the start of the 1800s, the main theory was bad air, but from the middle of the 1800s and later, germ theory takes over, and it carries on right through to the present day. Also, we got the discovery of DNA in the mid-20th century, and we now understand how genetic illnesses manifest themselves. What about the treatments? Well, in the 1800s, you've got effective anaesthetics for putting people to sleep before operations, and effective antiseptics that can help prevent people getting infected during operations. However, there's a big expansion of this in the 1900s and after. Chemical drugs such as sulfonamide drugs, antibiotics like penicillin, genetic medicine, blood transfusions, and even transplants, keyhole and microsurgery. But what about prevention? This is where governments get involved. In the 1800s, there are vaccinations against smallpox. That's the one developed by Edward Jenner. Also vaccinations against increasing numbers of diseases as the century goes on. You've got the 1848 and 1875 Public Health Acts that initially recommend improvements to public health and later compel governments to act. So governments are becoming increasingly involved in safeguarding health. In 1911, we have the National Insurance Act, which later goes on to fund things like the NHS. The 1942 Beveridge Report introduces the idea of caring to people from cradle to grave. And ultimately in 1948, the National Health Service in the UK was created. So these are the changes in ideas, treatments and prevention of medicine from the 1800s to the 1900s. Throughout this topic, we've explored how factors such as government have helped make these changes possible. There are 7 factors, including government, that we can identify that have helped make these changes. And they are government, individuals, teamwork, science and technology, war, chance, and actively seeking improvement. In other words, looking for the answers. Quickly note these down in your notes or your book now, and pause the video while you do this. Alright, let's move on. So consider the 1900s and after. After all, that's the focus of this lesson, looking at the 20th and 21st century medical ideas. Using the 7 factors that you should have noted down, complete the following tasks. Firstly, write down the 7 factors as headings. Group each of the 9 changes in the 1900s, left, under the appropriate headings. Some may fit into more than one. Select 2 developments that you think have been the most important in improving health and life expectancy. Explain your choices. And thirdly, select which of the 7 factors you think has been most important in developing medicine and explain your choice. Here are the factors again, and if you need an extension, are there any other medical developments or examples of progress that we can include under any of our 7 factors? I'll give you a bit of a hint here. Consider antibiotic medicines like penicillin. That involves the teamwork of lots of countries and individuals working together, but also individual genius. The genius of Alexander Fleming in discovering it, and the contributions of Howard Florey and Ernst Chain in developing it. Also, chance plays a role here, as does war. There was the chance discovery of penicillin, and the role of the Second World War in developing it, which was paid for by government, so that comes into it as well, harnessing new technology to mass produce it. And don't forget that Fleming was actively seeking improvement, because he was looking for just such a medicine. In other words, penicillin is one of the developments which covers all 7 of our factors for change. So be careful here and actually consider them in great detail. Not all of them will cover all 7, but some of them might. Pause the video while you complete that task. Done? Well, which 2 developments do you think have been most important in improving health and life expectancies? Certainly things like vaccinations have prevented so many diseases, but antibiotics have prevented so many people dying from infections that in earlier times they simply would have keeled over from. Whatever you've chosen, hopefully you're able to back it up. Progress. Rapid, steady, or slow? What can we infer from this graph? This graph will show how the average life expectancy has been transformed since 1900. In fact, the graph starts way earlier, at the beginning of our course in around 1250. The red line is for women, the blue for men. Let's see what happens. So from 1250, life expectancy is steady. It carries on like that, but starts to go up, and then goes up very dramatically. So our initial big blast up of life expectancy is around 1850. Think about the developments that were happening then in medicine which would have improved life expectancy. But the most dramatic growth is definitely in the 20th century, where it really does shoot up. Notice as well that actually by the end of the 20th century and into the 21st century, women's life expectancy has overtaken men for the first time. At all other points in history, it is lower. So consider these and answer these questions. Which of these statements best reflects what the graph shows? And explain your choice. Does it show that medicine has improved rapidly during the 1900s? Does it show that medicine has improved steadily during the 1900s? Does it show that medicine has improved slowly during the 1900s? Then secondly, which factor or factors that we've looked at in this lesson may explain why women's life expectancy has overtaken men's since 1900, but not earlier? Okay, pause the video here while you complete those tasks. It is certainly true to say that improvements in life expectancy have been pretty flat or steady ever since 1250, but that's not the case in the 20th century. You should have identified that medicine has improved rapidly during the 1900s. And I've put up a picture here which helps explain why women's life expectancy has overtaken men since 1900, and a lot of it is actually down to the negative impact on women's health that childbirth had in earlier times. Childbirth was one of the most dangerous stages of a woman's life, and a lot of mothers did die in childbirth, sadly. This meant that for an awful lot of history, with this very dangerous event in many women's lives, meant that it brought the average life expectancy down. Since childbirth has become more of a medical procedure and much safer as a result, the life expectancy for women has gone up. So what's brought down men's life expectancy? Well, we're still trying to unpick this. Some of it might be about men's lifestyle, some of it might be about the sort of work that men did during the 19th century, which is often heavier than it was for women, but that doesn't really explain current trends quite so much. That said, men are catching up to women, so perhaps that's something that we can crack in the future. Speaking as a history teacher, I don't have all the answers. So finally, why has there been such rapid progress in medicine since 1900? So use the factors that we've used earlier, that's the 7 factors, and the examples of medical development we have studied in this unit and in this lesson to answer these questions. Write one paragraph explaining why there has been rapid progress, including at least 2 factors. So give real examples of improvements to medicine and health that have been made in the 20th century and relate them to those 7 factors, things like government, individuals, chance, and so forth. Secondly, write 2 paragraphs explaining why there has been rapid progress, and including at least 4 factors. And then as the biggest challenge, write 2 paragraphs explaining why there has been rapid progress, and 1 paragraph explaining why there has not been rapid progress, and that will help give you a sense of balance. So if you want a basic task, do task 1. A more advanced one, do task 2. If you want the biggest challenge, do task 3. So if you're explaining why there has not been rapid progress in everywhere, think about the sorts of things that we've looked at where things perhaps haven't improved quite so quickly, or where there are still challenges that we need to address. Here's a writing frame should you need it. One reason there has been rapid progress in medicine since 1900 is, complete that sentence. An example of this is, this led to rapid progress because, and this shows there was rapid progress because. You can use the writing frame if you need to, but don't feel that you have to. Pause the video now while you complete those answers. Hopefully we've understood in this unit that there has been tremendous change, improvement and progress in medicine. For an awful lot of medical history, we've got great periods of continuity. For example, where even the ancient Greek idea of the 4 humours hangs around for a ridiculously long time. But with the breakthrough of germ theory and other scientific developments during the 20th century, and all these other factors feeding in one into the other to improve medicine, medical progress and life expectancy of health have rapidly improved in recent years. That's not something that's necessarily true of every period that we've studied. Even where medical understanding has improved, often people's general health has not, and that's shown by that flat line on the graph showing men's and women's life expectancy throughout history. I'm sometimes asked as a history teacher, if I could live at any point during history, when would it be? And for me, there's only really one answer. I would live right here and now. Why? Because even 30 years ago, things like living standards, quality of food, quality of health, and quality of medical understanding were way lower than they are now. Even though we've got massive challenges in the world right now, I tend to be a little bit optimistic. You can disagree with me if you want to, but when you look at history, you realise how hard things have been for so many people throughout most of history. Quite honestly, as interesting as I find it all, I wouldn't want to live at any other time than right now. Maybe you feel the same. Thanks for watching this. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and that's actually the end of this unit, and indeed the end of the Medicine Through Time course. Sure, there are other things that you'll need to check up on as well, but this will give you a really good introduction, and I hope that you do really well if you're studying for your exams. There will be future lessons on medicine in the Western Front, which is the Edexcel source-based component for this course. But for now, that's Medicine Through Time. I hope it was useful to you, and if it was, give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks very much, and good health.